messed up the whole program. But we'll try to fix that now by having more questions from the audience. Thank you. Thank you both. Really interesting. Are you up on the mic? Yes? Yeah? Yeah, if you speak out. Okay. What's your thoughts listening to this speak?
They're really interesting. I think it has a lot of things to do with what I actually do with the coffee with our coffee partners, with our coffee farmers, with our coffee producers. So my role is more technique. I play the role of teaching them how to be better technically. So I really believe that it's also a matter of making them to think how important and how proactive they can be by from deep inside, and not only keeping these attitudes of depending on someone who maybe gonna save them.
When you work with farmers, how much do you feel that you're adapting to climate change and to new weather conditions, and how much do you feel that you're actually just empowering and developing businesses?
Well, part of the work that we do at Origin is also promoting environmental techniques or environmental techniques on how to manage a forest, for example. But really, I don't feel like there is a real commitment, like in terms of really do something real.
From who? From
farmers.
From farmers.
From farmers, yeah.
What's the reason to that? Is it resources? Is it knowledge?
It's lack of knowledge, I guess. Lack of knowledge and lack of commitment.
But commitment, I mean, the farm is their life, I guess. So
yeah, because they're more interested in solving issues like how to survive. For them, it's not so relevant, the environment, if they don't have anything to eat, which is very common for coffee farmers. And it's also a matter of how important it will be for them, because they are not thinking in the long term. They are just thinking in the short term, because if they are small farmers, they just need to survive. Or, on the other hand, if farmers depends on the vision of the farmer. If they are just thinking in a business way, which is not bad at all, but if they are just focused on a profitability and not keeping a balance with other issues like the environment or the social part around, it can be bad as well. So, in my opinion, what we have to do is to promote them to keep a balance.
When listening to you, I think a lot of the things you mentioned here, farmers roasting the coffee, understanding the product even better, getting another part of the business, the social programs, and all of these, I mean, changing the farm, being more more sturdy when it comes to rains and everything. I think that sounds like good things. Is the climate change making the world better in that way? I mean, isn't this good? I mean, it's empowering, it makes the farmers better, and I mean...
No, well, you're raising a really interesting point, and it's actually a very compelling one, in the sense that we always think that complex problems are negative. But there's a way in which a complex problem asks something out of you that's very different than a simple problem. You know, it asks you to meet it. And so, you know, it's not always the best way to grow, you know, in terms of, you know, it's like you don't have to do it this way, but and it may not always happen, but when it happens, that you meet a complex problem with equal complexity, you probably grew to do that. do you know what I'm saying? There probably was sort of a maturation or a complexification in your own wisdom and your own enactment of that wisdom. So I think that there's some truth to it, and it is out there in the narratives, like, will climate change actually evolve us up instead of like destroy us? And so I think there is something to be said about that. I'm inclined to say that I didn't explain this in my talk, but there's 2 areas in Guatemala that I'm researching. And one, they're more individual actors, and the other was the one I presented on, which was working as a cooperative. The 2 photos, the chickens and the tomatoes, were from this area of individual actors. And the feeling was really different in both, and I would say that everyone's trying to survive. There's no doubt about that. I really hear you, and I think that that's why technical adaptations are so necessary, because it is life and death in many cases. It felt to me like when folks were working individually to meet the challenges of drought and roya and sinking production and very low price, they were having to do it on their own. And so they were just, doing these really dramatic changes, like going into chicken. Luckily that guy managed to create his chicken coops so he didn't have to take down any of his forests. So he's doing a bit of both. It is true diversification. But I could really see him kind of going the route of chicken from now on, poultry, instead of doing coffee. So, but in the cooperative, it was a different sentiment. There was way more commitment that I sensed. It's in the bigger picture look at sustainability. Because perhaps they are working together, and they always did have some of their cooperative members going out and doing the hard work of securing a grant or making sure the buyer is on. And so it's like probably anything. Like, why do we live in families? Because it's often, easier when there's 2 incomes and there's just 4 arms to pick up things after kids, and right? It just makes sense in a business context too, to a certain degree. So that's a little bit of a difference, is that some of the photos you were showing were individual farms, right? Individual farmers. Although I loved what you presented, and I love El Salvador. I feel like I worked for over 10 years on and off in El Salvador and have great respect for this country. Yeah.
I think it's sometimes hard to know what I as a roaster can do, and to kind of understand these, because now in one way you're saying, okay, you need to change the direction of the boat here, or do something, or move the adaptation and be a part of it. And I was, that's maybe a more technical part, but I was in Brazil, and first I was in one farm, and we talked about, I asked, how can you use as little pesticides as possible? And he said, the most important thing is to keep it clean. Have to pick up all the cherries from the ground, because that's where the brocas put their eggs. That's when you get those problems. Okay, I thought I understood something. I came to the next farm, an organic farmer. He was educated in forest management, and we walked around and tasted the cherries, and he was like, threw it on the ground. I said, no, you can't do that. And he's like, no, it's for the brocas. What? They also need to live. They're a part of the ecosystem. And and then I felt, I shouldn't even try to say anything here. I don't understand this. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, how do I know if I could give an advice, or if I should just shut up and listen, or visiting farmers, or how do you know?
Well, that's more technical, as you said. I would like to add something to your thoughts. I really believe that I wouldn't call it climate change, because a change is something that you cannot change eventually. So I would call it climate variation, because we can adapt to it. I'm not saying that climate variation is good, but it's moving us to adapt. So I think that I think nature is pushing us to think the other way around. He's kind of resistant, or he's kind of fighting everything that we are doing. So of course we're paying a price for it with all this events, environmental events happening everywhere. So in coffee is the same. So then part of my work is also try to help farmers to adapt to the new conditions. I'm not saying that coffee farms should be moved up hills, because I think that is not the solution. But at least with technical practices, I guess they can adapt better to at least mitigate some of the consequences of climate variation. So I would not call it climate change. I would call it variation, because it's something that we can adapt to socially, environmentally, or technically. And about what you just said, yeah, I think that's a matter of education. We should know, in terms of insecticides, we should know we should learn how the insect actually lives, to make any decision on how mitigate it. So it's not about. I mean, I'm not so confident in saying that.
No, but what I guess I'm saying, one of my question is who am I? You know, coming as a roaster, visited a couple of farmers to kind of, should I interact in that situation, or, I mean, to me it sounds stupid.
Yeah, but in the end, coffee farmers are the experts.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of respect as well.
Yeah.
They know their farms, they know their techniques, and.
Do we have any questions? Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned in your presentation, Gail, that.
Do you want to stand up so we?
So you mentioned in your presentation that we pushed the problem of climate change or variation down to on farmers most of the time. To what extent, since we are largely in the specialty industry, is the paying of higher prices also a sharing of the issue? I'm sure there's plenty of people committed to paying 3, 4, or 5 times what the current market price is. So how much can that help, or is it helping?
Okay, so if you guys can sell it at a higher price and then generate more and kind of keep your price higher than the market, I think both of us could probably answer to this. In my research, it really helps, because the current price in Guatemala is under the impacts of climate change or the impacts of weather variability. People have to add more onto their farm. They're adding, fertilizer, whatever, 4 times a year instead of twice. So there's all these things they're having to do more frequently. So their costs are going up, but the price in the market's staying down. And you might already know this, but when you buy higher, it makes the whole thing function sustainably from a financial perspective, for sure. But it can also give people a future. If they're selling under what they're putting into their farm, there isn't a future there. So what does that do for one's mindset? If you're not able to make ends meet, and this is what your forefathers have done, so it's not, and you want your kids to want to work in it, but you yourself are not making ends meet, what does that do, right? It creates a lot of poor sentiment and, poor outlook for the future. I think it's one big reason why people are diversifying out of coffee and actually migrating in this particular area. So you paying more and doing what I would call instead of value chain that's sucking wealth out of producing regions, making it one that's more circulatory. So it's bringing wealth back or retaining value in the earlier parts of the chain. To me, that's really helpful from what I've seen.
Yes. The problem is too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Is that correct? I mean, the global warming issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we be talking about how we can, specifically reduce that?
Yeah, and I think that would be yes is short answer. I think it'd be really interesting in the ways, in what you do, each of you, to examine that closely. Is there a way you could swap out a product that that produces less carbon emissions, or select a different, I mean, I don't really know much about shipping, but is there any shipping line that is more sustainable? You know, I know it uses really, really terrible fuel. Shipping fuel is one of the worst on the planet. So could you advocate as a sector for a better shipping fuel? That, you know, this is where the wisdom comes, you know, from origin is everywhere, right? So from the roasting community, how could you reduce carbon emissions? I'm not the one to say, but you might be. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a really interesting question.
Alec?
I had a question about paying higher prices, which I think we all should do. My question is about how, in your experience, you said you were working in two parts of Guatemala, one that is more cooperative based and one that's more single farmer.
Yeah.
We want to pay higher prices. What is your opinion on, is it better to just pay as high a price as possible and give it to the farmer and have them decide how that's used? Is it better for us to sort of divert some of that higher price into specific social programs?
Mm-hmm.
Is that like, should we be giving all the money and responsibility to the farmers to figure out what the best use of it, or should we be saying you should be using a little bit for something else, or like what's your opinion on?
Well, that's a really, really good question, and I think that we could have maybe a conversation at greater length about that kind of a thing. So, as a short answer,
Thank you. We'll move on.
no, as a short answer, I mean, it's a bit a question of philosophy in a way. And what's interesting about my research sites is that they're both actually selling to the same value chain that pays a premium. And so it's interesting because I've got one site that are individual farmers and the other that's a cooperative. And so I get this interesting view to sort of see, how are they doing? You know, like, how is this actually going to land for the producers? What's interesting about this, so it's Costco and San Francisco Bay Coffee they're the buyers. And they not only buy at a premium, which benefits producers, but they also find additional funding through their charity grant to support schools, not in specifically areas where coffee families live, but just the general area. Like, they want to invest in the area. How is this, you know, the notion of tracing source is so novel. It's like, what's going on in your area? Why is there no hospital? Or why is the road terrible to get to the hospital? Or so, you know, in a way that the charitable donation to the area is just to kind of invest in the producing region, regardless of whether or not it's directly linked to coffee. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that is actually an important distinction. The Guatemalans really held up that distinction as important. That said, the premium that producers are earning, like the higher amount is great. I believe, philosophically speaking, that it looked to me, having spent for a bit of time now in both places, that the cooperative's more skilled and able to actually make use of that money well. So, you know, they've got their finger on the pulse in a more kind of, they're more aware of what the needs are, instead of these single actors. Like, one actor is selling to this good value chain, the others are in the market and they're barely making it alive, and it's all for one for all. Like, no one's really watching another person's back. And it felt to me like, you know, if you buy at a higher price there, it just makes one family rich. It doesn't necessarily invest in the overall development of an area. This, however, is philosophical. Like, if you believe in individualistic, you know, then you would take a different tack. But yeah, so I'm aware that there could be different perspectives out there.
What's your thoughts on that, Marjorie?
Well, I would like to say that, of course, prices have to be based on quality. Can you hear me? Of course, prices have to be based on quality. I think also that if we are aware of how these extra prices are used by developing programs that integrates farmers with roasters socially and also technically by improving coffee facilities, should be a great a great effort to know exactly where all this money or extra prices are giving benefits to the farmers. I guess it's a pretty nice way to look for sustainability.
All right, thank you so much,
Thank you.
both of you. That was really interesting. And as I said, if you have more questions, I'm sure you're happy to answer that during the time you're here anyway. We will now move on to cupping.